Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing? Danny here. I'm not out doing my research today, obviously. For this particular segment, I don't have to be out in the forest to explain what this video's about. Now, I want to let everybody out there know what I'm about to tell you. The public has never known, and you probably never would have, unless I tell you. Now, I kept this to myself for quite a few years. When Garland was alive, and so did he. Now, secondly, what I'm about to tell you, there was only 3 people that knew about these chain of events. Garland, me, and Stuff. And Garland's not here any longer, as you know, to have his 2 cents in this. And Stephanie's no longer with us too. And she'll know Stephanie was my wife. So I'm the only one left that knows what happened in one wild week. And actually, this went on for more than a week. But the first event I'm going to explain to you, of events, lasted about a week. So, I kind of figured that it's about time everybody should know, okay? And I kept this secret with me since 2015. Now, let's begin with this, of what sparked these so-called events that actually made me and G feel like we were slingshot into the Twilight Zone, because it was just literally blowing our minds of what was going on through these events. Excuse me. So, let's start with this. This is how it all began. For 3 straight years, in one area, outside of the town of Forest Hill, California. And we were approximately around 12 to 15 miles outside of Forest Hill, which is a little pioneer town. We had conducted our research out there for years, but this is where we began. Once we did about 3 years of research up here below the Oregon border, around Helena, California, and around Willows and around Bluff Creek. So, this is what went down. This particular area I'm talking about was an area that was filmed on National Geographic's The Bigfoot Files, The New Evidence, which aired on National Geographic in late 2014 in December, and it aired again in early January of 2015. Now this is I'm going to break it down to you exactly what happened. Now this is 3 years prior, before it was even filmed. In this one area that me and G were conducting our research day and night, and we were also inserting our trail cams in particular areas in this vicinity. We knew that it was private land was owned by a logging company. The logging company owned around 30 to 36,000 acres of this land. Now, within the first 3 years, we were introduced to a particular fellow who was a caretaker of the land for the logging company. We told him what we were doing and what kind of research we were conducting. Research that had to do with cryptology or cryptozoology. I like to call it cryptology. And in other words, we explained to him that we were researching on a cryptid creature called Bigfoot. And he gave us permission to go in there and conduct our research, which we had no problems, none whatsoever, for 2.5 straight years. Now, in this area that we had done that 2.5 years of research, which we researched day and by night, and not to mention we have set up our trail cams in certain areas that we had felt that had a lot of high activity. So in this one area, I'm gonna break it down, the amount of evidence that we produced out of this area. We have produced several videos that we documented this by video. Everything in here was documented by video. And where we came across several times footprints in the snow in the winter. Now these were large footprints. They measured anywhere from 17 to 20 inches in length, 5.5 to 6 inches in width. They would always start out the same, no origins to them, but there they were, and no exit to them, where they ended. This happened on about 3 or 4 different occasions that we have documented and filmed these kind of footprints. In the same area, which we also documented by video, one particular day that we had came across these tracks, I could follow them for a little bit, and means you were tracking them, and then they would stop, and we continued where I felt like maybe they would continue somewhere down the line. And as we kept on going progressive towards this property, because it started before we went on the land, as we crossed this mountain road, there's a barbed wire fence. What was in front of us, we were right on its heels. This happened very early in the morning in the winter. I believe it was around somewhere between November and December. And the footprints led me across the mountain road to the barbed wire fence. On the barbed wire fence was a big fistful of hair that got stuck in the barbs of the fence. When I went up to the fence to investigate and observe it, I knew right there and then, and I knew this only because at that time period I had already been studying a couple of years on forensics. Because I knew it would come in handy in the kind of research we were doing. So I used the forensics that I had been studying on and educating myself on. By observation of it, I knew it had nothing to do with any known animal in the Sierra Mountains, or nor was related to any human being. And of course the footprints collaborated with that. As I looked at the barbed wire fence, I also found there was dried up parts of blood. The blood was so contaminated, being out in that environment and such, that the blood just dried up. But once it dried up, it just was worthless. I tried to chip some away. It was fruitless. So I went for the hair. Now, the sad part about the hair is the fact that the frolics, the hair frolics, which is very important, were still attached to the hair itself. But it was so wadded up into the bar fence, I had to literally cut it away from the fence to get the bulk of the hair. And I lost the frolics in the process. Now, whenever I did this process, as I say, I'm using forensics, I wear surgical gloves. And so when I cut the hair away from the fence, and I bagged it in a Ziploc baggie. Later when I got home, I put it in an envelope and sealed it. That's the most proper thing to do. As far as I could see, as far as I was concerned, it wasn't out in the open very long. There was no chance for it to get contaminated. And so the process I used is the process you would want to use. So in other words, the hair sample was clean as a whistle. In the same area, and what it was a female Sasquatch that we knew existed in this area. And why did we know? Because we caught her on a trail cam. And she was accompanied by a junior. She was very large in stature. The trail cam caught her at night. And the coloration of her hair is what I call a silver, salt and pepper. And at night, when the trail cam took the video of it, of course it appeared she looked white, like you would think of a Yeti. And she had breasts. No doubt it was a female. Standing right off to her right was a junior. The junior, I would say, was probably around about 6 feet, 6.5 feet, about 6 feet in height. She was around 7.5 feet in height. The junior was covered in a reddish brown hair. In the same area where we found the fistful of hair, we knew it was her because the hair matched her color. What I figured would happen is that we were so close on her heels that she was trying to evade us as quick as she could, and she hurdled the fence, and that's why it caught in her inner thigh. When I was at the bottom fence where the prints came to a halt because she leaped over the fence, obviously there was a timber line just on the other side of the bottom fence. I see no footprints. I got a little closer to look over the barb, and as I was looking down, there's a gully. Went down like this and came to the other side, and then you're into the timber line. When I looked down there, there was a set of 2 more footprints. So she went over, hurdled it, landed down the gully, and took a bound and was in the forest. That gave it the appearance that there was no exit. In the same area, we also caught on one of our trail cams is what I classified as a cryptid unknown species. Also in this area is where Garland filmed, and we documented me wood knocking and communicating with a group of these hominin hybrids that dwelled in that area. And it was a large group. This is also the same area that one day we were there, and we were resetting our trail cams there again. We had all brand new batteries, all of our other electronic equipment was charged, everything was hot to trot, ready to go. When we got there, we started hearing a lot of movement and a lot of interaction was going on. So G got the camera, tried to fire it up, nothing would work. All of our electrical equipment just went dead, period. And we experienced this quite a few times before, but could not come up with an answer of why. Until later on down the road, I came up with the answer to it. It's called static electricity. Now, when that happened, our equipment shut down because something eventful happened after that moment. Garland and I were surrounded by a part of this group of hominids. There was around 4 or 5 of them. One actually presented himself off to our right. And he was there out in the open for, I would say, probably about maybe about 10 seconds. And he evaded back into the woods. The rest of them were letting us know they were there by what? By screwing with our mind mentally. Doing all kinds of things that they do to screw with your mind. To put you in a state of paranoia and fear. And they were getting extremely aggressive. This is also the area where I had finally tracked them down and I was on the verge to find out exactly where they were dwelling at, and my suspicions were right. They were dwelling in unknown caverns that have never been discovered on the North American River. At that point, that area we were concerned about where they were dwelling at was only about 3 miles away. Are you following me so far? So as you can see, an abundance of evidence has been accumulated in this one area in a 2.5-year period. Now, we'll bring in National Geographic. When I posted the hair on my channel on YouTube, within days, I got an email, and it was from Professor Brian Sykes, and he was really interested in the video, interested in the hair, and he asked me if I had the sample with me, and I told him yes. He told me that he was going to be flying into San Francisco, and if Garland and I can join him in a luncheon in San Francisco at the airport where he was staying at the hotel. And I agreed to. So we set the meeting up. I took the sample of hair with me. When we got to San Francisco, we sat down, we met Professor Sykes, we sat down and we had lunch together. This luncheon lasted for about 3 or 4 hours. And we had a lot of good conversation, talked about a lot of things. Then during that conversation, he asked me, did I bring the hair sample with him? And I said, yes, I did. He says, may I see it? I said, yes, you can. So I pulled it out in the envelope, I handed him the envelope. Professor Sykes took the envelope and he popped it open, he looked inside, and his eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. And he looked at that and he looked at me and Garland and he says, we may have something here. And he goes, can I keep this sample? And I said, you can go ahead and keep the sample. I got a whole lot left. That I keep to myself. He said, good enough. At that moment, he also asked us, he told us that he was putting together a documentary on researchers and Bigfoot. He asked me and Garland if we would like to be in the documentary, and of course we said, sure, you bet, why not? And that's how we got into National Geographic. He also told us that he had already been taking, he's already had like about 24, 26 samples at that time, but not a one could match what we just gave him. And that's why he got so stoked about it. And what he did that we did not know was that the next day, he jumped out of an airplane and flew to Oregon. There's a fellow in Oregon I know, and of course Brian Sykes ended up knowing too. And he does DNA testing. Well, Brian went there and had that hair DNA tested. We had no idea that he did this, and we found out later. That hair was never ever mentioned in the documentary whatsoever. So, now we get to the part where now we're going to start filming the Bigfoot Files and New Evidence, National Geographic. So in our segment, we took him right back to the spot where we had been doing all of our research, okay? Now, at this time still, this is almost 3 years later from when we started our research, we still have free reign to go on the land and conduct our research. No problems, as it always has been. When we started filming, some other strange events happened when we were filming. And I just put it this way, there was some things that went on that the sound man was getting awfully nervous, and he was kind of freaking out on us. And so several times we had to take a break between filming. He had to calm his nerves down, and pretty much everybody in the film crew, and including Mark Evans, was getting a little uneasy. And not to mention the infamous sound that the sound man that he picked up recorded. After we got through filming, they tried to validify the sound to try to match it to different types of sounds. Guess what? Nothing. They could not find one frickin' sound that matched what they heard, what they picked up, which actually was even in the documentary. And not only that, everything was getting closer and closer and closer to us, besides other movements. The sound man started picking it up real quick. We took another break, and he said, "Bad, what's ever going on out here?" He says, "It's getting near and near to us. What's going on here?" Getting really nervous. I got pat him on the back, the camera crew, because Bad, I know it was really, really strenuous and hard for them to stand their ground to get this filming done. I pat him on the back for that. It even got to the point where we were asked, what are they coming here for? And Garland says they're hungry. Mark Evans says, what do you mean? And I says, well, they're coming to feed. And then a few other events occurred. And I looked at Mark, and I told him, I says, you look awfully nervous, pal. It kind of makes the hair in the back of your neck stand up, don't it? He said, yeah, it does. The hair in the back of my neck is definitely standing up. Now, after we film, okay, now it airs on national television, and it went worldwide. It was a 3-hour special. Anybody that saw that, you know how it came down. Late 2014, no changes. But then, when it aired again in 2015, in early January, a week after it aired, me and G went back to doing research again. We went to the same area, except something changed. We were no longer allowed on the land anymore. And what I mean by that, all these signs were posted all along the property line. No trespassing. Trespassers will be arrested and prosecuted. The entrance that every entrance that we knew we can get in was blocked off. There was no way in hell you can get in there any longer. Me and Garland kind of looked at each other and we said, that's kind of strange. Why all of a sudden this happened? It's never been like that before. Now, here's where it gets really going, these chain of events, where we felt like we were slingshot into the Twilight Zone. So, knowing me, I always think outside the box. So I said, well, Danny boy, what you going to do with this one? Easy answer. I'll go in deeper in the interior. I'll flank it and come around the back door, so to speak. We'll find the boundary line. So we had to go in about another 10 to 12 miles. And sure enough, I was correct. We came in through the back door. Now, this is not private land. This is just plain open wilderness. We hiked in there quite a few miles until we found the boundary line of the logging company. I said, ha! You can't keep us out now. While we were up there, me and Jay were discussing of, this is kind of strange what's going on. Why is it was not any longer allowed in there? All of a sudden, why were all these no trespassing signs posted? Why was all these interest areas for us to get into as if they knew what we were coming into, in and out of? And it was all blocked off. These are questions that had to be answered. So while we were discussing this, we decided to take a little break. We sat on a big stump. And we're in the middle of nowhere. Mind you this, in the middle of frickin' nowhere. And then all of a sudden, we hear somebody on a bullhorn, yelling through the bullhorn. Come on down here, we know you're here, we know you're there, we know where you're at. And this went on for a couple of minutes, and we're like looking at each other like, what the hell is this shit? Who the hell's doing that? So we wandered over, and because we were right by a ridge, see? So we wandered over, we got to the ridge, and we're looking down. When we looked down there, there's a guy down there with a bullhorn, and he says, there you are. He says, now get on down here. We need to talk. Me and Garland looked at each other like, how the hell would they have known we were here? And who the hell are they? Well, we started ascending down the mountain. And as we got closer, I noticed one of them was a deputy sheriff. And also there was a pickup load, about a half a dozen of what Garland called U-turn boys. Looked like a bunch of rabid hillbillies come out of the hills. And they were all armed. This ain't hunting season. And they were armed. We're looking at us and saying, man, something's wrong with this shit. Something's really definitely wrong. When we got down to the bottom, I asked the deputy sheriff, I go, what the hell is this all about? And he says, well, you're on private land. I said, the hell we are, this is open land. You're full of shit. He said, I said, so what else are you trying to pull? What else is on your mind? And he says, can I see your backpack? I says, what for? He goes, I want to search it. I said, sure. I took it, threw it down in front of his feet. I says, how the hell did you find this here? He ignored it, ignored the question. He bent down, he unzipped the bag, he looked inside. Now, I had all the typical gear that you would have as a researcher for, whatever particular evidence we would come across. Inside our bag, we always carried with us, I had 2 pounds of plaster for plaster castings in case we wanted to cast some footprints. And it's set in it's in a Ziploc bag, right? And he looks at it, he looks down, and he looks up at me, and he goes, drugs, huh? Looks like meth. Me and Carter looked at each other, we said, what? You're out of your mind, dude. But whatever. He said, I got you on a felony. I go, oh, really? I said, maybe you ought to test it first to see if it is what you think. And he did. I couldn't believe it. This jackass actually did. He cracked the bag open, stuck his finger in there, went like that, And the guard started chuckling a little bit. He looked at us, what's so funny? I says, you know, that shit'll make you thirsty. Maybe you ought to have a little bit of water. Get it? A little water mixed with the plaster, hardens. Of course, he didn't find it that funny. I said, so, is it meth? And he didn't say nothing. And I go, well, I guess that throws your felony down the tubes. Then he went on, and he's looking at my communicating stick I use, my knocking stick. And he says, well, you know that's a lethal weapon and illegal? That's a felony? And I says, what, in the middle of the woods is a wilderness? I said, you're bullshit, dude. You don't even know what you're talking about. It's to communicate. I go, it's a knocking stick. I communicate with it. No, you don't. It's a baton. We went back and forth, back and forth. Finally, I got pissed and I said, look it, man. You don't know what the frickin' hell you're talking about. I says, this is a knocking stick. I've used it many times. It's on my YouTube channel. On YouTube. And he goes, then after that he went on, he looked at me and he says, I see you're carrying a handgun. He says, you know, that's a concealed weapon? That's a felony? And I looked at him, I had a vest on, right? Unzipped, zipped the vest, and it was open. You could see my holster with my 45 in it. And that is no crime whatsoever. Straight across the books. Period. And I told him, I said, look, what in the hell is this all about? And I says, and furthermore, what is this? Felony for this, felony for that, felony for this. And I told him, I says, let me ask you a question. How did you get that badge pinned on your chest? Because, dude, you are totally inept about the law. He says, oh, so you know about the law, huh? Better than I do? And I go, you goddamn right I do. I do it for a living. The only difference between you and me, I'm a private contractor. Armed private security. Yes, I have the same authority as a cop on the street, and I can make arrests, and I have to know all the laws just like they do. You are totally inept. You got no business wearing that badge. All you're doing is abusing that badge. You have no jurisdiction in the middle of the wilderness. So, he had to let us go. He says, well, jump in my vehicle, I'll give you guys a ride back to your vehicle. Okay. We jumped in his vehicle, we rode off. We got to the entrance of the mountain road, and when we got out there, then, guess who shows up? A game warden. A game warden comes out of nowhere. He pulls up. So the two are conversing, and the deputy sheriff tells the game warden, he says, I got nothing